Hey guys. Tonight we're stepping softly into a world of soft wool and starched cotton, of closets that smelled faintly of cedar and rosewater, where getting dressed was a small daily ceremony rather than an afterthought. We're talking about the forgotten fashion trends of 1950s America, the ones that once filled every closet on every quiet street, and then, slowly, slipped out of fashion and out of memory. Before we settle in, I want to thank the viewer who suggested this one. You sent this idea in so thoughtfully, and honestly, so much of what we make here begins with you, with a little note, a memory, a request tucked down in the comments. It means more than you know, and it is the thing that keeps this little channel growing. If you enjoy these quiet trips backward, a like or a subscribe helps more people find their way here. And if you ever feel like sharing what your mother wore, or what once hung in your own closet, I read every comment. And if you would rather drift off to just the sound of this, we are now on Spotify as well, with the link waiting for you down in the description. So go ahead and get comfortable. Dim the lights, switch on a fan for that soft, steady hush. Pull the blanket up, settle into your pillow, and let the day fall away behind you. Now let your mind wander back. What did a closet actually smell like in 1955? What did it feel like to slip on a pair of white cotton gloves before walking out the door? Why did every woman own a good hat, and every man a well-kept felt one? What did it sound like when a crinoline rustled across a kitchen floor? And when did we quietly stop dressing, carefully and deliberately, just to walk downtown on a Saturday? And just like that, it is 1955. The closet door stands open. A dress waits on its padded hanger. Somewhere down the hall an iron hisses against cotton, and the day is only just beginning. Let us start with a skirt that turned every ordinary sidewalk into a small stage. You slip it on and feel the weight of all that fabric settle around your legs, yards and yards of it, cut in one great circle, so that when you spin, it lifts and blooms like a flower opening in fast motion. It is the skirt your older sister wore to the sock hop, the one your mother pressed flat on the ironing board while the radio played low in the kitchen. You could not walk quietly in it if you tried. It swished with every step, a soft announcement that you were on your way somewhere, and there was a kind of joy stitched right into the shape of it, a joy we do not always let ourselves wear so plainly anymore. You remember the first time you saw one up close, spread out flat on the cutting table, and how you could not quite believe that something so wide would ever wrap around a single waist. The felt ones were the favourites, heavy and warm, and if you were a certain kind of teenager, you had one with a poodle applique on the front, its little leash done up in tiny rhinestones and a bit of chain. Others were printed with cherries or musical notes or nothing at all, just a bold, clean colour that caught the eye across a crowded room. You saved for it. You wore it until the hem gave out, and you never once mistook it for anything but special. Getting ready in it was half the pleasure. You would stand before the mirror and give a little turn, watching the fabric lift and fall, timing your spin so the skirt reached its fullest just as the record hit the chorus. Your mother would remind you to sit like a lady, to gather the folds beneath you so you did not crush them, and you would nod and forget within the hour. There was so much fabric that you learned to manage it the way you might manage a small, well-loved animal, tucking it, smoothing it, keeping it from catching on chair legs and car doors and the hands of clumsy boys. And the dances. Oh, the dances. The gymnasium strung with crepe paper, the folding chairs pushed back against the walls, the punch bowl sweating quietly in the corner. You would step onto that waxed floor, and the skirt became part of the music itself, rising with every turn, brushing against the skirts of the other girls until the whole room seemed to be one great blooming garden set spinning. The boys stood along the edges in their pressed slacks, working up the courage, and when one finally crossed the floor to ask, you rose and the fabric rose with you, and for 3 minutes the ordinary world simply fell away. It was not only for dancing, of course. You wore it downtown on a Saturday, to the malt shop and the picture show, and it made even an afternoon of window shopping feel like an occasion. You wore it to the church social and the family reunion, and the first day of a new school year, when everything felt possible and a little frightening at once. The skirt carried you through all of it, a small daily brightness you could put on with a zipper and a belt. And when you passed a shop window and caught your own reflection, you stood a little straighter, because a girl in a full skirt simply looked like she was going somewhere worth going. There was a particular sound to a room full of them, a sound almost nobody thinks to describe now. Not quite a rustle, not quite a swish, but a soft, continuous motion, like wind moving through a field of tall grass. You would hear it in the hallway between classes, in the aisle at the pictures, on the sidewalk on a Sunday morning when the whole town seemed to be walking to church at once. It was the sound of movement made visible, of ordinary days dressed up just slightly beyond the necessary, and it is a sound the world simply does not make anymore, however hard you strain to hear it. Somewhere along the way the skirts grew narrower, and then they grew shorter, and then the whole idea of dressing up to go nowhere in particular quietly faded from the everyday. We traded all that lovely motion for something easier, something we could pull on without a thought, and there were good reasons for that, and no one is wrong to have wanted comfort. But every now and then you catch sight of an old photograph. A young woman caught mid-turn with her skirt lifted like a bell, and you feel a small tug at the heart, because she was not dressed for anyone in particular. She was dressed for the sheer pleasure of being young on a Saturday night, and she wore that pleasure where the whole world could see it. So picture it there in the closet still, that great circle of fabric waiting on its padded hanger, holding its shape, holding its promise. It asks nothing of you but the willingness to spin, and there is something worth sitting with in that. The idea that joy was once a thing you could simply put on and step out into the evening and wear until the last song played. Beneath that skirt lived a secret. You reach into the closet and pull out the crinoline, that stiff cloud of netting that gave every dress its wonderful, impossible shape. It scratched a little at your knees, and it took up half the back seat of the car, and getting it through a doorway required a certain practiced turn of the hips. But oh, the sound of it! That constant papery rustle followed you everywhere, into church pews and diner booths and slow dances in the gymnasium. You learned to sit carefully, to smooth it down with both hands. It is a sound almost entirely gone from the world now, and there is something tender about remembering a time when even standing still had a little music to it. You owned more than one if you could manage it, because a single crinoline never seemed quite full enough, so you layered them, 2 and sometimes 3 at a time, until your skirt stood out from your body like the petals of some enormous flower. The more layers, the grander the effect, and the grander the effect, the more careful you had to be about every doorway and every narrow aisle and every crowded stairwell. You developed a whole quiet choreography for moving through the world, a gathering and a tucking and a sideways slip, all of it done so smoothly that no one watching would ever guess the effort. Keeping them stiff was its own devotion. The netting softened with wear and with washing, and a limp crinoline was a small tragedy. drooping sadly beneath a skirt that had lost all its glory. So you starched them, dipping them in sugar water, some said, hanging them to dry until they crackled to the touch. You stored them upside down, hooked over a hanger by the waistband so the netting could fan out and hold its shape. A well-kept crinoline was a point of quiet pride, and every girl had her own tricks, whispered back and forth like small domestic secrets. They were not comfortable. Let us be honest about that the way we ought to be honest about all of it. The netting pricked at the backs of your knees, and on a hot summer evening the extra layers held the heat close against your legs like a warm net. Sitting was a negotiation. You would lower yourself carefully onto a chair, pressing the crinoline down with both palms, and even then it would try to spring back up around you like something with a mind of its own. More than one girl found herself in a movie theatre seat with her skirt rising slowly toward her chin, wrestling it back down in the dark while the picture played on. And yet you would not have gone without it. The crinoline was the difference between a dress that hung and a dress that lived. It was what made the full skirt full, what gave the whole silhouette its lift and its lightness, what turned a length of printed cotton into something that seemed to float a few inches off the floor. When you stood before the mirror with it on, you saw not just yourself but a whole shape, a grand and generous outline that the times had taught you to admire. It made you feel, for all its scratchiness, a little like the women in the magazines. The sound was the thing, though. That is what stays with the people who remember. A whole church filling up on a Sunday morning was a symphony of soft rustling, dozens of crinolines settling into the pews all at once. A crowded diner on a Friday night had it too, that papery whisper beneath the clink of the coffee cups. And on the dance floor it was everywhere, rising and falling with the music, so that the room itself seemed to breathe. You did not have to see a woman coming. You could hear her, that gentle continuous sound announcing her arrival before she ever turned the corner. We have lost that, and we hardly noticed the loss. The world got quieter in that one small way, and then the crinolines went into the attic and the giveaway box and the memory, and the dresses that came after simply hung close against the body and made no sound at all. There was comfort in that change and freedom, and no woman who lived through the scratch of those layers would tell you to bring it back. But something went with them all the same. A little music, a little grandness, a little of the sense that getting dressed was a thing worth going to trouble over. So when you picture it now, that stiff pale cloud pulled from the back of the closet, do not only picture the discomfort, picture the girl who wore it, standing before her mirror, turning this way and that, listening to that soft papery whisper, and feeling herself become, for the length of an evening, something larger and lovelier than the ordinary day allowed. It cost her something, that shape, and she paid it gladly, and rustled off into the night, and left behind a sound the world has quietly stopped making. It is a weekday morning now, and before you step out the door you reach for your gloves, not for warmth, but for something harder to name. They wait in a shallow drawer, folded in pairs, soft white cotton for spring and summer, kid leather for the cooler months. You pull them on finger by finger, and something in you straightens a little, stands a little taller. A lady wore gloves to church, to the department store, to lunch downtown, to almost anything that counted. They were armour and manners and quiet pride, all at once, and when you got home you laid them out to air and washed them gently by hand. It is strange, is it not, to think how much care once went into something so small. You had a whole wardrobe of them, if you were the sort who paid attention to such things. Short ones that reached just past the wrist for daytime and errands, longer ones that climbed toward the elbow for the evening, worn with a sleeveless dress so that the bare skin between glove and sleeve became its own small elegance. There were gloves in soft pastels to match a spring suit, gloves in crisp navy and black, and always the white ones, kept immaculate as fresh snow, because a smudge on a white glove was a small public embarrassment you took real pains to avoid. Buying them was a little ceremony of its own. At the good department store there was a glove counter, and behind it a woman who knew her stock the way a jeweller knows his stones. She would measure your hand, and bring out pair after pair on a velvet pad, and help you ease them on, working the cotton or the kidskin down over each finger with a practised patience. There was a special pillow for resting your elbow while she smoothed the leather into place. You did not rush it. You tried several, held your hands up to the light, decided. It was the kind of unhurried attention that has almost entirely left the way we shop now. Keeping them was as much work as wearing them. The white cotton ones especially, which showed every mark of a day out in the world, the ink from a signed cheque, the dust from a stair rail, the faint grey of a city afternoon. So you washed them by hand in the evening gently with a mild soap, working the lather into the fingertips where the dirt collected. Then you laid them flat to dry, or slipped them onto special glove form shaped like little wooden hands so they would keep their shape and be ready and crisp for the morning. Your mother taught you this, and her mother taught her, and it was simply part of what it meant to keep yourself. There was a whole language in them too, an etiquette so detailed it seems almost impossible now. You kept your gloves on for a handshake but drew them off to eat. You wore them into the church but might slip them off for the hymnal. A lady did not, as a rule, powder her nose or fuss with her hair while gloved. It was all understood, all passed down without ever quite being written down, a set of small graces that everyone simply knew. And to move through the world knowing them, and keeping them, was to belong to something, to be recognized at a glance as a person who had been raised to a certain care. They did something to how you carried yourself, those gloves. It is the part that is hardest to put into words. With your hands covered in soft white cotton, you did not gesture quite so wildly, did not fidget, did not reach out and touch things without thinking. You became, for the length of the errand, a slightly more composed version of yourself. There was a self-possession that came with them, a quiet sense of occasion laid over even the most ordinary trip to the bank or the milliner. You were dressed. You were ready. You were, in the fullest sense of the old word, presentable. And then, gradually they went. The world sped up, and the rules loosened, and it began to seem fussy, even a little absurd to pull on gloves for a trip to the shops. By the time the decade turned again, they had slipped from the everyday into the drawer and then into the memory. You might still see them at a wedding, or on the hands of a very old woman on a Sunday morning, holding on to a grace the rest of us had let go. But the daily ritual of them, the finger-by-finger pulling on before the door, was over, and most of us did not even mark the day it ended. So there they sit still in that shallow drawer, folded in careful pairs, soft and white and waiting. They were such a small thing when you think about it, a bit of cotton over the hands, and yet they held so much inside them, all that care and pride and unspoken belonging. To reach for them now is to reach back toward a time when even the simplest act of stepping outside was worth a moment of preparation, and when the hands that met the world were kept as gently as anything a woman owned. Now look up to the high shelf where the hat boxes are stacked like a small paper city. You had a hat for everything, a neat little pillbox for Sunday, a wide brim for summer weddings, a felt cloche for cold grey afternoons downtown. You would stand before the mirror and set it just so, tilting it a fraction of an inch until it felt right, then pinning it in place. To leave the house bareheaded felt almost unfinished, like a sentence stopped halfway. The hat completed you. It told the world you had taken a moment to prepare, that the day deserved your effort. We lost that ritual so gradually that most of us never noticed it going. The boxes themselves were half the pleasure. Round and sturdy, printed with the name of the department store, or the little milliner's shop in fine gold script, they stacked so neatly and held their treasures so carefully. Opening one was a small event. Lifting the lid, folding back the tissue paper, drawing out the hat by its crown as gently as if it were a living thing. Each one carried its own faint scent of the shop where it was bought, of the powder and perfume of the last wearing, of the tissue and the cardboard and the years. To this day, for those who remember, the smell of a hat box can bring a whole decade rushing back. And the shops where you bought them. The milliner's was a world unto itself, a small bright room lined with mirrors and hat stands, the walls a garden of ribbon and net and silk flowers and the occasional bold feather. The woman who ran it had an eye, and she used it, watching you as you tried this one and that, turning you gently by the shoulders toward the light, murmuring that, no, not that one, but this. This was your colour, this was your line. She could look at a face and know at once what suited it, and there was real artistry in that, a craft that has all but vanished from the ordinary town. There was a hat for every station of the year and every station of life. In spring, straw and pale ribbon and the first bright flowers. In summer, the wide soft brim that shaded your face at the garden party and the outdoor wedding. In autumn, the felt came out deep and warm, and in the coldest month something close and cosy that hugged the head against the wind. A young woman wore hers with a tilt and a bit of daring. An older woman wore hers with dignity, plainer perhaps, but no less considered, and a bride wore hers, or her veil, as the crown of the most watched day of her life. Church was where the hats came fully into their glory. A congregation on Easter morning was a sea of them, every shade and shape and size, brims and bows and little clusters of silk violets, each one set carefully that morning before the mirror. You noticed the new ones. You remembered last year's. There was a gentle, mostly kindly rivalry in it, a way of putting your best and brightest self forward before God and the neighbours both. And the little girls beside their mothers wore small versions of the same, learning early that this was simply what a lady did on the Lord's Day. Getting one to sit right was a skill all its own. There was the tilt, first of all, that precise angle that could make a plain face striking and a striking face unforgettable. There was the hat pin, long and sometimes wickedly sharp, threaded through the crown and the hair to hold the whole thing steady against a gust of wind. You learned young how to place it, how to anchor a hat so it would ride out a breezy afternoon without a wobble. And there was the final look in the mirror, the small turn of the head this way and that, before you decided, yes, now I am ready to be seen. It is one of the great quiet mysteries how quickly it all fell away. Within a few short years, the hat went from a thing no respectable woman would step out without to a thing worn only on the rarest occasions. The hairstyles grew taller and more elaborate and left no room for a hat to sit. The cars grew low, and a woman with a fine hat could barely climb inside. The world grew casual, and casual had no place for the daily ceremony of the mirror and the tilt and the pin, and so the hat boxes went up to the high shelf, and then to the attic, and stayed. But climb up and take one down now, and blow the dust off the lid, and lift the tissue back. There inside is a small perfect world, a hat that someone chose with care, that someone set before a mirror on some morning long ago and pronounced just right before stepping out into her day. It stood for effort, for occasion, for the simple grace of preparing yourself to meet the world. And though we have gone bareheaded so long that most of us have forgotten there was ever another way, there is something in that little paper city of boxes that still whispers of a time when the day was worth dressing all the way up to the top of your head. Sit down at the edge of the bed for this one, because stockings took patience. You roll them up slowly, easing the fine nylon over each leg, careful not to catch them on a rough fingernail or a splinter of the vanity. Then comes the part everyone remembers. You twist to check the mirror, making sure the dark seam runs straight and true down the back of each calf. A crooked seam simply would not do, and if you laddered a pair, well, you did not throw them out. You dabbed the run with a bit of clear polish and coaxed a few more wearings out of them. In a world that throws so much away now, there is a quiet dignity in remembering how carefully we once kept things. You had learned the hard way just how easily they went. A rough spot on a chair, an unfiled nail, a child's toy left on the floor. Any of it could send a run racing up the leg in an instant, and there went a whole day's care and a good portion of your careful budget. So you moved differently in them. You smoothed your hands over the seat before you sat. You slid rather than stepped into a tight space. You developed a whole gentle wariness of the world's rough edges, all in service of that fine, precious, maddeningly fragile film of nylon. The seam was the thing that took real skill. In those years, the stockings had a line running right up the back, and getting it straight was a small daily art. You would draw the stocking on, then crane over your shoulder to the mirror, adjusting and twisting the fabric a fraction of an inch at a time until the line ran true from heel to hem. A friend or a sister might help, standing behind you, tugging gently, telling you left, no, a touch to the right, there, that is it. A crooked seam was the sort of thing another woman noticed at once, and mentioned, kindly or not so kindly, and so you learn to get it right. There's a whole ritual of care around them. You wash them by hand in the evening, in cool water with a bit of mild soap, working the suds through gently and never wringing, only pressing the water out and hanging them to dry over the shower rail or a length of line strung in the bathroom. You kept your good pairs separate from your everyday ones. You saved the newest, most perfect pair for the most important occasion, and you would no more have worn them to scrub a floor than you would have worn your Sunday hat to bed. They were an investment, and you treated them as one. And when the inevitable happened, when a run appeared despite all your care, you did not simply give up on them. You reached for the clear nail polish and dabbed a careful drop at the top and bottom of the run, stopping it from travelling any further, and you wore that pair a good while longer with the little repair hidden beneath a hem or a skirt. It was ordinary, that thriftiness. Everyone did it. There was no shame in a mended stocking, only in a wasteful woman, and the difference between the two was one of the quiet moral lessons of the age. For a while, in those lean years just past, the real thing had been almost impossible to come by, and women had made do in ways that seem almost heartbreaking now, drawing a line up the backs of their bare legs with an eyebrow pencil to give the appearance of a seam, tinting their skin with makeup or even with tea to suggest the colour of stockings they could not buy. So when the nylons came flooding back, bright and cheap and plentiful, there was a real joy in it, a small daily luxury restored. You did not take them for granted. You remembered too well what it had been like to go without. They shaped the way you carried yourself too in ways that went beyond the practical. A woman in fresh stockings, seams straight, walked with a certain awareness of her own legs a certain care and grace in her step. There was a finished quality to it, the sense that you were fully and properly dressed, that no detail had been left to chance, and on a good evening, catching your reflection, you felt it, that small satisfaction of a thing done right, of an effort made and paid off. The seams faded away first, and then the whole careful ritual loosened with the rest of the decade, and eventually a woman could go out with bare legs and think nothing of it at all, which would have seemed nearly scandalous once. There was freedom in that, and comfort, and a good deal of time and money saved. But something small went with it too. That patient sitting at the edge of the bed, that twist to check the mirror, that refusal to waste a thing that could yet be saved. And so, remembering it, you find yourself oddly moved by the sheer care of it, by all those quiet evenings spent tending gently to something so fragile, and coaxing from it every last bit of use it had to give. It is the middle of the morning, and this is the dress doing the work. The shirtwaist, buttoned neatly down the front, belted at the waist, its skirt full enough to move in but modest enough for company. You wore it to vacuum the living room and to greet the milkman and to sit at the kitchen table writing out the grocery list. It was practical and pretty at the same time, cotton in a small floral print, easy to wash and hang out on the line. It was the uniform of a whole generation of women who ran their homes like small, well-tuned machines, and when you see one now in an old photograph, you can almost smell the starch and the sunshine drying on the porch. It took its name and its shape from the man's shirt, with that neat buttoned front and its little collar, but softened, given a waist and a skirt, and turned into something wholly a woman's own. And that was the genius of it. It looked put together without being fussy. It could be made at home from a paper pattern for very little, and it could take a whole day of hard use and still look presentable when your husband walked through the door at supper. There was nothing else quite so useful in the closet, and so most women owned several in rotation, one drying on the line while another did the day's work. The morning it dressed you for was a busy one. There was the breakfast to make and clear, the beds to strip and remake, the floors to sweep and the rugs to beat and the wash to hang, the marketing and the mending and the long, slow simmer of supper begun in the early afternoon. The shirtwaist went through all of it. You would push the sleeves up to your elbows at the sink, tie an apron over the front at the stove, kneel in it to reach beneath the sofa, stand at the ironing board pressing your husband's shirts while your own dress held its shape around you. It was made for a woman in motion, and a woman in that era was almost never still. The prints are what people remember, those small cheerful florals, the sprigs and dots and gingham checks, in soft blues and yellows and faded reds. They were the colours of a sunny kitchen, of curtains and tablecloths, and the whole bright domestic world a woman built around herself. There was optimism stitched into them, a sense that the ordinary day was worth a bit of prettiness, that even the woman scrubbing the pots deserved to look down and see something that lifted her spirits. It was a small kindness a woman did for herself, choosing a print she loved for the dress she would sweat and work in all day long, and it could rise to the occasion when it had to. That was the other quiet marvel of it. The very same style of dress, in a finer cotton or a bit of silk, with a good belt and the right shoes and a string of glass pearls, could carry you to a luncheon or a meeting of the ladies' club or an afternoon call on a neighbour. You did not need a whole separate wardrobe for stepping out. The shirtwaist bridged the two worlds, the housework and the social call, the everyday and the slightly better than everyday, and it did both without complaint. Keeping it was its own steady rhythm. Cotton in those days meant ironing, and plenty of it, and the shirtwaist with its buttons and collar and full skirt was no quick job at the board. But you did it, sprinkling the fabric with water, working the heavy iron over collar and cuffs and down the long pleats of the skirt, watching the wrinkles surrender one by one. There was a satisfaction in it, hard as it was, in the smell of the hot cotton and the sight of the finished dress hung crisp and ready on its hanger. It was the kind of work that showed, and a woman took some pride in that. We are apt now to look back on that dress and feel a complicated tenderness, because it stands for a life that asked so much of the women who lived it, so much unpaid and unending labour, so much of a whole self poured into the running of a house. And that is true, and it should not be softened away. But the dress itself was never the cage. It was the honest, comfortable, cheerful thing a woman put on to meet a hard day's work with a bit of grace, and there is no dishonour in remembering it kindly. So picture her still, in the middle of the morning, in her floral cotton with the sleeves pushed up and the belt cinched neat, moving from room to room in a house she kept alive with her own two hands. The dress moved with her all day long and never held her back. And when you catch it now in a faded photograph, hanging on a woman standing proud in her doorway, you understand that you're looking at more than a garment. You're looking at the quiet, tireless engine of a whole way of life. Reach now for the twin set, that gentle pairing of a short-sleeved shell and its matching cardigan, folded together as if they were always meant to be. You slipped the sweater over your shoulders when the office ran cool, or buttoned it clear to the top when the evening turned. It came in soft lamb's wool and cashmere for those who could afford it, in colours like powder blue and dusty rose and a warm buttery yellow. There was a tidiness to it, a put-together feeling that asked very little of you and gave a great deal back. It is the kind of quiet elegance that never really shouted, and perhaps that is exactly why we remember it so fondly. The two pieces were made to match, and that was the whole quiet idea of it. The shell beneath, close and neat, and over it the cardigan in exactly the same shade and the same soft wool, so that whether you wore the sweater or carried it or draped it just so around your shoulders, everything belonged together. There was an ease in that. You did not have to think, did not have to search the closet for something that went. The thinking had been done for you, and all you had to do was reach for the pair and step into a look that was finished before you began. You wore it in so many corners of your life. To the office, where it struck exactly the right note, capable and feminine both, warm enough for the draught by the window and proper enough for the man who signed your cheque. To the classroom for the young teacher who wanted to look grown and steady before a room of restless children. To the campus worn with a full skirt and a string of pearls, the very picture of the nice girl going somewhere. And to the afternoon call and the church social and the quiet weekend, where its soft colours and softer lines made it welcome anywhere at all. The way you wore the cardigan itself became a small language. Buttoned all the way up, it was modest and neat, the good girl at her most proper. Buttoned only at the top with the rest left loose, it was easy and casual, a Saturday sort of look, and draped over the shoulders with the sleeves left empty, fastened perhaps with a little sweater guard, a pair of clips joined by a delicate chain, it became something almost glamorous, the mark of a woman who knew exactly how she wished to appear. You learned these gradations without ever being taught them, the way you learned so much of how to move through that world. The good ones were treasures. Lambswool was fine, but cashmere was the dream, soft as anything you had ever touched, warm out of all proportion to its lightness, and dear enough that a really good twin set might be the gift of a special birthday or a Christmas long saved for. You cared for it accordingly. You washed it by hand gently and laid it flat to dry so it would not stretch and lose its shape. You kept the moths away with cedar and lavender, and you wore it for years because a good sweater, well kept, simply did not wear out, and there was pride in that kind of keeping. It asked so little and gave so much, and that was really the heart of its appeal. In a decade that could demand a great deal of a woman's appearance, all that pinning and pressing and cinching and lacing, the twin set was a small mercy. You pulled it on and you were done, and yet you looked entirely of a piece, entirely presentable, entirely right. It was comfort that did not look like comfort, ease dressed up as elegance, and there is real cleverness in a garment that manages both at once. The colours are what linger in the memory, those soft pastels and gentle neutrals, the powder blues and the pale pinks and the soft greys and greens. They were quiet colours, unassuming, and they suited a certain unassuming grace that the era prized in its women. Nothing about the twin set shouted for attention. It simply looked lovely and correct day after day, occasion after occasion, and it let the woman inside it get on with her life without ever letting her down. It never quite went away, if we're honest, the way the crinolines and the gloves went away. You can still find a twin set, still wear one now, and no one would think it strange. But the particular place it held then, the near universal ownership of it, the way nearly every woman had one folded in her drawer, ready for any cool room or any small occasion, that has softened into history. And so remembering it feels less like mourning something lost and more like greeting an old friend, one who was always kind, always reliable, always there to slip around your shoulders when the evening turned cool. There is a warmth in that, fitting for a thing made of the softest wool a woman could afford. Now for the skirt that changed the way a woman walked. The pencil skirt hugged the hips and narrowed toward the knee, so slim that you learned to take smaller steps, to move with a certain deliberate grace whether you meant to or not. Some called it the wiggle skirt, and they were not entirely wrong. You paired it with a fitted blouse and a pair of heels, and felt every inch the modern woman, the kind you saw stepping out of taxis in the magazines. It asked something of you, that skirt. It asked you to slow down, to carry yourself with intention. And in a hurried world, there is something almost lovely about a garment that insisted you take your time. It was, in its way, the very opposite of the full-circle skirt, and the two of them lived side by side in the same closets and the same years, offering a woman two entirely different ways of being. The full skirt was youth and movement and the dance floor. The pencil skirt was poise and control, and the working day, the office and the city street, and the confident stride of a woman with somewhere important to be. To choose one over the other in the morning was to choose, a little, who you meant to be that day. The walk it demanded was unmistakable. With the fabric so snug from hip to knee, you simply could not stride out the way you might in a fuller skirt. Your steps grew shorter, your hips swayed a little with each one, and the whole effect was slow and deliberate, and, to the eyes of the time, distinctly alluring. Some women resented the way it slowed them down. Others learned to love it, to lean into that measured, unhurried grace, to understand that moving slowly could be a kind of power all its own. You did not rush anywhere in a pencil skirt. You arrived. It flattered in a particular way. Cut close and true, it traced the line of the body and made the most of an hourglass shape, and paired with a nipped-in blouse and a good belt, it created that clean, sculpted silhouette the era so admired. Add a pair of heels to lengthen the leg and lift the whole posture, and a woman felt transformed, elegant and adult, and entirely in command of herself. It was the skirt of the secretary and the career girl, yes, but also of the sophisticated woman about town, the one who knew exactly the impression she wished to make and made it. There was a practical price to all that elegance, of course. You learned to sit carefully in it, to lower yourself smoothly and keep your knees together, because there was no gathering of loose fabric to hide behind. You learned to climb stairs at a certain angle and to get in and out of a low car with a good deal of thought. Some pencil skirts had a small pleat or a little slit at the back, a kind mercy that gave you just enough room to walk without tearing a seam. And you were grateful for it, that small allowance, on every flight of stairs and every long city block. It carried a whiff of the modern that thrilled the young woman making her own way. The magazines were full of it. The sleek professional in her pencil skirt and her tailored jacket, briefcase in hand, stepping out into a world that was slowly, unevenly, beginning to make more room for her. To put on that skirt was to try on a certain future, to feel yourself part of something newer than the aproned world of your mother's kitchen. It was not rebellion, exactly, nothing so loud, but it was a quiet declaration all the same, stitched into the narrow line of that hem, and it endured the way only a truly good design can. Long after the crinolines had gone to the attic and the hats had left the shops, the pencil skirt held on, because it did something no fashion of the moment could undo. It made a woman look elegant, capable and self-possessed, and those are things that never quite go out of style. You can find one now and wear it now and feel a little of that same deliberate grace it gave to the women who wore it first. So picture her stepping out of the taxi in the grey city morning, that slim skirt to the knee, those heels striking the pavement in short measured beats, her whole bearing composed and unhurried and sure. She could not have run if she wanted to, and perhaps that was the secret of it. The skirt would not let her hurry, and so she moved through the rushing world at her own pace, taking her time, carrying herself with an intention we could all stand to borrow. There is a lesson folded into that narrow hem, and it is a gentle one. Slow down, stand tall, arrive as though you meant to. Here is a thing that turned a plain need into something wonderful. If your eyes were tired, you did not simply settle for whatever the optician handed you. You chose cat-eye frames that swept up at the corners like little wings, sometimes dusted with rhinestones, sometimes in a bold shade of red or tortoiseshell. They made a virtue of the very thing you might have wished to hide. You wore them at the typewriter and at the kitchen table and out to the pictures, and they said something about you before you spoke a word. It is a small reminder that style at its best was never about hiding who you were. It was about wearing it well. For a very long time before this, glasses had been a thing to apologize for, plain and round and purely practical. The mark of a bookish girl or an old woman, something you wore only when you had to and took off the moment you could. And then, somewhere in these bright post-war years, a wonderful thing happened. Someone decided that if a woman had to wear glasses, they might as well be beautiful, and the whole idea of eyewear turned itself inside out. No longer a flaw to be endured, the glasses became an ornament, a chosen thing, a part of the face a woman actually wished to show. The shape itself was the delight of it. Those upswept outer corners lifted the whole face, echoed the winged flick of the eyeliner a woman might wear beneath them, and gave even the mildest expression a touch of the dramatic. They were flirtatious without being loud, clever and a little playful, and they framed the eyes the way a good hat framed the face. You could peer over the top of them, or push them up your nose with one finger, or slip them off with a small theatrical flourish, and every one of those gestures carried a bit of style. And then there was the ornament. The finer frames came dusted with rhinestones at the corners, tiny sparkling constellations that caught the light when you turned your head. Others came in colours that would have been unthinkable a generation before, deep reds and warm tortoise shells and pale flattering pinks, some marbled, some clear, some in 2 colours at once. You did not buy one pair to serve for all occasions, not if you could help it. You had a practical pair for the day, and, if you were fortunate, a more glamorous pair for the evening, chosen to suit an outfit the way you might choose a brooch. They belonged to a certain kind of woman in the picture we carry of that time, the sharp-eyed secretary looking up from her typewriter, the librarian who was not nearly so severe as her frames pretended, the bright young thing at the soda fountain, glancing over the rims at someone across the room. In every case, the glasses were not a weakness, but a statement, a way of saying that intelligence and allure were not opposites at all, that a woman could see the world clearly and look wonderful doing it. There was a confidence in that, and the frames wore it beautifully. It says something rather lovely about the spirit of the age, this insistence on making even the corrective and the practical into something to be enjoyed. A weaker eye was simply a fact of many lives, then as now, but rather than treat it as a small shame to be minimized, the era chose to make of it an occasion for a little sparkle, a little wit, a little self-expression. And in that choice there is a small and useful wisdom, the understanding that the things we cannot change about ourselves are so much better carried with flair than with apology. We have gone the other way mostly since then. Eyewear grew quieter, plainer, more apt to disappear against the face, and for a long while the cat eye seemed like a relic, a bit of costume from an old photograph. And yet it has a way of coming back around, because the idea at the heart of it never really loses its charm. Every so often a young woman will find a pair in a bold red with a wicked upswept corner, and put them on and feel, at once, a spark of that same old glamour, and understand exactly why her grandmother loved them. So picture the frames there on the vanity, folded and waiting, the rhinestones catching a bit of the morning light. They corrected a small flaw and turned it, with a sweep and a sparkle, into a signature. And there is a warmth in remembering a time that took such a thing to heart, that looked at a plain necessity and decided with real cheer to make it lovely. It is a gentle little lesson, worn right there on the bridge of the nose. Whatever you must carry, you may as well carry it beautifully. Not everything in that closet was gentle, and we should be honest about that. The girdle waited in the drawer, a firm sheath of elastic and boning that smoothed every line before the dress ever went on. You stepped into it and tugged and adjusted, and then you breathed a little more shallowly for the rest of the day. It was uncomfortable, and it was expected, and nearly every grown woman owned one. There was a whole quiet discipline to looking effortless back then, a great deal of hidden effort beneath the calm surface. It is worth remembering, as we admire those smooth silhouettes in the photographs, just what they sometimes cost the woman inside them. Putting one on was a morning labour in itself. You stepped into it and drew it up over the hips, working the stiff elastic into place inch by inch, and there was a good deal of tugging and settling and holding your breath before everything sat right. Some fastened with hooks, some pulled on whole, some had garters dangling below to hold up the stockings, so that the girdle and the hose became one single architecture beneath your clothes. It was not a thing you put on lightly or quickly. It was a thing you committed to for the whole of the day ahead, and once it was on, it changed how you lived in your body. You sat straighter, because the boning would not let you slouch. You breathed more carefully, because there was only so much room to breathe. You moved a little more deliberately, more contained, and by the end of a long day you understood in your bones the price of that smooth line the mirror had shown you in the morning. The relief of taking it off at night was real and enormous, a great loosening, a whole body sighing at once. Every woman who wore one knew that particular pleasure, the evening when the day's discipline finally came undone. It was not simply vanity, though it is easy to name it so from here. It was expectation, deep and near universal, the shared and unspoken understanding of what a properly dressed woman's figure ought to look like. The dresses of the age were cut for it, that nipped waist and smooth hip assuming the foundation garment underneath. To go without was to look, by the standards of the time, somehow unfinished, undisciplined, not quite pulled together. And so a woman wore it not because anyone forced her exactly, but because the whole world around her simply agreed that this was what one did. There's a phrase we sometimes reach for in those years, that beauty knows no pain, or that one must suffer to be lovely, and the girdle was that idea made real and worn against the skin. The effortless grace so admired in the magazines, the smooth and gliding elegance of the woman stepping into a room, rested on a great deal of effort kept carefully out of sight. Beneath every calm, composed surface was a bit of struggle, a bit of endurance, a small daily bargain struck between comfort and the demands of appearance. And the striking thing is how quietly it was all born, how little it was ever spoken of, how each woman simply took it as part of the ordinary weather of being a woman. We can hold two thoughts about it at once, and perhaps we should. We can admire those lovely lines in the old photographs, that undeniable elegance, that sense of a person entirely composed and presented. And we can feel, too, a real tenderness for the woman inside the garment, breathing shallowly through a long, hot afternoon, counting the hours until she could set herself free. Both are true. The beauty was real, and so was the cost, and honesty asks that we remember them together rather than letting the one erase the other. When the freedom came, later, it came as a genuine relief, and few who had worn the girdle mourned its passing. The clothes loosened, the expectations eased, and a woman could at last move through her day drawing full breaths, dressed for comfort as much as for show. That was a real gain, and it would be foolish to pretend otherwise. Not everything the past held was worth keeping, and this, most who lived it would say, was one of the things well and truly left behind. And yet remembering it still teaches us something, sitting there stiff in its drawer. It reminds us that the smooth and easy surface of any age is very often held up by an effort we do not see, and that the women who moved so gracefully through those bright rooms were carrying, quite literally, more than met the eye. So when you look now at that composed and elegant figure in an old family photograph, offer her a little extra kindness. She looked effortless because she had decided to, and underneath, all day long, she was holding it all together, quietly, without a word, the way so many strong women have always done. It is a school morning now, and here are the shoes by the door. Saddle shoes, white with that broad band of black or brown across the middle, laced up tight for a long day of hallways and playgrounds and long walks home. You polished them on Sunday nights, whitening the leather and buffing the dark saddle until they looked almost new again, though by Wednesday they were scuffed right back to honest. Every teenager owned a pair, and every pair told the story of its owner in creases and stains. They were sturdy, unfussy, made to be worn hard. And there is a warmth in remembering shoes that were meant to be lived in rather than merely looked at. They were in a way the great equalizer of the school corridor. Rich child or poor child, They mostly wore the same shoes, and so a pair told you less about a family's money than about a young person's habits. You could read someone in them. The careful girl kept hers gleaming, the white part chalked bright, and the saddle glossy, while the boy who lived hard on the ball field wore his cracked and greyed and grass-stained, and neither one thought much about it either way. They were simply what you put on your feet, the same as everyone else, and there was a quiet comfort in that sameness that ran all through those years. The Sunday night ritual is the part that lingers most. Out came the white polish, that thick liquid with the little dauber built into the cap, and you painted it carefully over the scuffed leather and set the shoes on a sheet of newspaper to dry. There was black or brown polish, too, for the saddle, worked in with a soft cloth and buffed to a shine. And the laces, if they had gone grey, you might wash them or replace them outright, threading fresh white ones through the eyelets so the whole shoe looked reborn. You did this while the radio played low or the television murmured in the next room, a small weekly labour that meant Monday morning would find you looking your best. There was a satisfaction in the finished pair drying on the paper, ready for the week. By midweek, of course, all that care had surrendered to reality. The playground did its work, and the long walk home, and the shuffle of 100 feet in a crowded hallway between classes, and by Wednesday the white had gone grey at the toe and the saddle had picked up a fresh scuff or two. But that was no failing. That was the shoe doing exactly what it was made to do. A saddle shoe was not meant to sit pristine in a box on a shelf. It was meant to carry a young person through the whole rough tumble of growing up, and it wore its history plainly in every crease and stain and softened edge, the way a good pair of shoes always has. There was a particular pleasure in the way they aged, too. A brand new pair felt stiff and formal, almost too clean, and it took a week or two of honest wear before they moulded to your feet and moved the way you wanted them to. By then they had become truly yours, broken in and comfortable, and you were a little sorry when at last they wore out and a new stiff pair took their place. It is a feeling anyone who has ever loved a pair of shoes will recognize, that slow friendship between a foot and the leather that carries it. They belong to a whole picture of that time, worn with bobby socks folded neat above the ankle, with a full skirt or a pair of rolled dungarees, with the easy, restless energy of the young. You saw them at the sock hop where the kids danced in their stocking feet, or their saddle shoes on the polished gymnasium floor, sliding and spinning to the music. You saw them on the sidewalk after the final bell, a whole crowd of them scuffing along toward home in the afternoon light. They were so tied to youth that to see a pair now is to be pulled straight back into a hallway, smelling of chalk and floor wax and paper, into the whole ordinary drama of being young and in school. They were not a fashion exactly, in the way a hat or a gown was a fashion. They were simpler than that, and more durable, a plain good thing that a young person put on and lived in and hardly thought about at all, and perhaps that is why they hold such warmth in the memory. They ask nothing of us but that we remember them fondly, these honest shoes that carried a generation through its school days. So there they sit by the door, laced and waiting, a little greyed at the toe from yesterday's walk home. They ask nothing of you but that you wear them and live in them, and they gave back years of faithful service. And there is something to miss in that, a shoe made honestly to be used, gathering its whole story slowly on your feet. With those shoes came the socks, and the socks mattered more than you might think. Bobby socks, thick white cotton, folded down into a neat cuff that sat just above the ankle. You wore them with saddle shoes and loafers and flat little pumps, and the whole look was so tied to the young that a whole crowd of teenage fans earned the name Bobby Soxers. Getting the fold just right was its own small art, even and crisp, never slouching down toward the heel. It was such a simple thing, a plain white sock, and yet it belonged so completely to that time that you can hardly picture the era without it. The fold really was a matter of some pride. You rolled the top down once, or turned it into a neat cuff, and you wanted it even on both feet and crisp all the way around, sitting at just the right height above the ankle bone. A sock that had slouched and puddled down toward the heel looked careless, and no girl who cared for her appearance would let it stay that way for long. So you tugged and turned and adjusted throughout the day, a small, unconscious habit, keeping that cuff sharp and clean the way you kept your hair combed and your collar straight. It was one of those little disciplines of appearance that the young learned early and practiced without a thought. Keeping them white was its own ongoing battle, and a real one. Cotton picked up everything. The dust of the schoolyard and the scuff of the shoe and the grime of a long day on your feet, and a greyed, dingy sock simply would not do beside a freshly polished saddle shoe. So they were washed often and hard, bleached bright, hung to dry until they were dazzling again, white as fresh milk. A drawer full of clean, gleaming bobby socks was a small sign of a well-kept girl, and a mother took a quiet pride in sending her children off in the morning with their socks as bright as they could be made. That name, Bobby Soxer, tells you how deeply the little sock had worked its way into the life of the age. It came to mean the whole tribe of them, the teenage girls who swooned over the crooners and screamed themselves hoarse at the concerts and lived and breathed the music of the moment. The sock became shorthand for a whole generation of the young, for a new kind of youth that had a little money and a little freedom and a great deal of feeling to spend. To be a Bobby Soxer was to be part of something new under the sun, a youth culture all its own, and the plain white sock was its unlikely little banner, worn proudly on every teenage ankle in the land. They went with nearly everything a young person owned. With the saddle shoes, of course, but also with penny loafers, a bright copper coin tucked into the slot for luck or for a phone call in a pinch, with the flat little pumps a girl wore for something a bit dressier, with rolled dungarees for a Saturday and full skirts for a dance. There was a freshness to the whole look, a wholesome brightness that suited exactly the way that time liked to picture its young people, scrubbed and cheerful and full of restless energy. And there was a particular sweetness in how a small thing could carry so much meaning. A sock is about as humble an item as a person can own, purely practical, hidden mostly inside a shoe. And yet the young made even this into something considered, something with its own small rules and its own quiet pride. That care over a detail so tiny tells you a great deal about the spirit of the age, about a world that believed even the least of things was worth doing well, worth a moment's attention before you stepped out the door. It is almost funny how something so small can hold a whole world inside it. A plain cotton sock, folded neat above the ankle, and yet you cannot bring the era fully to mind without it, without seeing those bright white cuffs above the black and white saddle shoes, moving down a hallway or across a dance floor. It is stitched right into the picture, inseparable from the rest. So picture the drawer full of them now, washed and bright and folded into their pairs, waiting for a school morning. Such a simple, humble thing, and it carried the whole spirit of being young in it. That care over a small detail, that pride in looking just right from the ankles up. There was a sweetness in that, in giving honest thought even to the sock on your foot, and it is a sweetness worth remembering, tender and small and true, Here is the little thing that made all the difference. The cinch belt, wide and elastic, buckled tight at the smallest part of the waist, taking an ordinary dress and giving it a shape that turned heads. You wore it over the shirtwaist and the full skirt and even a simple sweater, and suddenly the whole outfit came into focus. It was inexpensive and endlessly useful, and most women owned several, in leather and patent and bright summer colours. It is a lesson we have half forgotten, that a single small piece, chosen well and placed just right, could transform everything. Sometimes the smallest details carried the most weight. The magic of it lived entirely in the waist. The whole silhouette of the age turned on that one point, that dramatic and much admired difference between a cinched middle and a full skirt blooming out below, and the cinch belt was the simplest, cheapest tool a woman had for creating it. You could take a plain shift or a loose sweater or a simple cotton house dress, wrap that wide band around your middle, pull it snug, and watch an ordinary shape become that prized hourglass in a single motion. It cost so little and did so much, and there was a real, satisfying cleverness in the whole idea of it. They came in every kind to suit every purse and every mood and every season. Wide elastic ones that stretched and gripped and forgave a little around a full meal. Stiff leather ones with a proud buckle that held their shape all day. Patent ones that gleamed under the lights of an evening. And bright, cheerful ones in the colours of summer, cherry red and turquoise and sunny yellow, ready to lift a plain dress into something festive for a picnic or a Saturday downtown. A woman with a good eye kept several on hand and reached for them the way she reached for a scarf or a brooch, a small finishing touch that changed the whole tenor of what she wore. It was, above all, the thrifty woman's dearest friend, and in those years most women were thrifty out of long habit and hard memory. You could not afford a closet full of dresses, but you could afford a handful of belts, and with them you could make the same few dresses look like a whole wardrobe. The blue cotton looked like one thing with a crisp white belt, and quite another with a bold red, dressed down for the market on Tuesday and up for the afternoon call on Sunday. It stretched a modest wardrobe a long, long way, and there was a genuine satisfaction in that, in the quiet art of getting so much out of so little. There was a skill to wearing it well, too, small as it seems. The belt had to sit at exactly the right place, at the true narrowest point, and be pulled to exactly the right snugness, tight enough to shape, but not so tight that a woman spent the day in misery. Cinched just so over the right dress, it could take a woman's breath away when she caught herself in the mirror, could make her stand a little straighter and step out a little prouder. And that lift in spirit, that small daily pleasure of catching a good reflection, was worth every bit of the pennies the belt had cost. There is a real wisdom folded into that simple band of elastic, and it is one we might do well to remember in our own more crowded closets. The cinch belt taught that you did not need everything new, did not need to start over or buy more, to look put together and pulled sharply into focus. You needed only the right small thing, chosen with a little care and placed just so, to bring the whole of it together. It was a lesson in attention rather than abundance, in seeing clearly what you already had and making the very most of it. So picture the little row of them coiled in the drawer, or hung neatly on their hooks inside the closet door, ready to transform whatever the day required of you. Such a small, humble, inexpensive thing, and yet it held the quiet power to change everything it touched, to take the ordinary and give it shape and grace. There is something almost heartening in that, in remembering an age that understood so instinctively how much a single, well-chosen detail could do. It asks so little of us, that old wisdom, and offers so much in return. Attend to the small things, cinch it in at the waist, bring the whole of it into focus, and the rest, more often than not, will fall gracefully into place around it. It is a breezy afternoon, and you reach for a scarf before you head out. You fold the square of silk or rayon into a triangle, settle it over your set curls, and knot it snugly beneath your chin. It kept your hair in place on a windy day, protected a fresh set from a sudden rain, and looked wonderfully chic doing it, especially with a pair of sunglasses and a convertible if you were lucky enough to have one. Movie stars wore them, and so did farm wives, and somehow it suited them both. There is a certain freedom in that image, a woman with a scarf and the wind at her back, that still feels warm to picture all these years later. It began, like so many useful things, as a matter of a pure practicality. A woman's hair in those years was a real investment of time and effort, set in curlers and pins, coaxed into shape at the vanity or the salon, and a sudden gust of wind or an unexpected shower could undo an hour's careful work in a single careless moment. The scarf was the simple shield against all that. Knotted tight beneath the chin, it held the whole set safely in place through wind and weather, and let a woman step out into an uncertain afternoon without fretting over the hair she had laboured so long to arrange. But it never stayed merely practical for long, because any woman with an eye for style could see at once how well it looked. There were a dozen ways to tie it, and each one said something a little different about the woman wearing it. Under the chin for the plain and windy day, knotted behind the neck for a breezier, more casual air, wrapped close about the head, and tucked in the manner of the film stars, worn with big dark sunglasses, for a woman who wished to look glamorous and a touch mysterious besides. The very same square of cloth could be workaday or dazzling, plain or striking, all in the turn of a single knot, and it belonged remarkably to every kind of woman at once, which is a rarer thing than it sounds. The farm wife wore hers to keep her hair from the dust and the field, plain and sensible and tied without a thought. The suburban mother wore hers to the market and the school pickup, keeping herself neat between errands, and the movie star wore hers, silk and expensive and printed with some designer's name, tied just so, roaring down the coast road in an open car, the very picture of freedom and glamour. It was one of the rare things that crossed all those lines cleanly, that looked as right on the woman feeding the chickens as on the one signing autographs, and there is something quietly democratic and lovely in that. There was an economy to it too that suited the age. A scarf cost little, took up almost no room, and did the work of several things at once, part rain hat, part windbreak, part ornament. A woman could keep a whole small collection of them, in every colour and print, folded into a drawer, and pull out whichever suited the day and the outfit. In a time when so much was made to last and so little was wasted, the scarf was a small perfect example, endlessly useful, always ready, never out of place. That image of the open car is the one that lingers, the one that still stirs something warm in the chest. A woman at the wheel or in the passenger seat, scarf knotted snug beneath her chin and dark glasses on, the top down and the wind streaming past, going somewhere with the whole bright afternoon stretched open before her. It spoke of motion and possibility, of a woman out in the wide world under her own power, and the scarf was the small perfect emblem of it all. Even now the picture carries a real warmth, a sense of ease and freedom and forward motion that feels well worth reaching back to hold for a moment. So picture the drawer of them now, those bright folded squares, silk and rayon in every colour and print imaginable, waiting patiently for a breezy day. Such a simple thing, a square of cloth and a practised knot, and yet it did so much, protecting and adorning in the very same easy motion. There is a gentle grace in remembering it, in the thought of a woman pausing at the door to tie her scarf against the wind, ready now to meet whatever the afternoon might hold, her hair safe and her spirits high, and the whole open world waiting there before her. Open the little dish on the dresser now, the one where the jewellery lives. Not diamonds, not for most people, but costume pieces that sparkle just as brightly under the lamplight. Rhinestone brooches, strands of glass pearls, clip-on earrings that pinched a little by the end of a long evening. You did not have to be wealthy to feel a bit glamorous. A few dollars bought a brooch that could dress up a plain wool coat, and you pinned it on with the same care a duchess might give the family jewels. It was affordable joy, honest little sparkle, and there is something deeply likeable about a time that found so much delight in it. The great gift of it, the thing that made it so beloved, was that glamour for once was within reach of nearly everyone. The real stones belonged to the very few, locked away in banks and safes, but the sparkle itself belonged to anyone at all, and a woman of the most ordinary means could still open her little dish and choose something to make an evening feel special. A rhinestone that caught the light did not much care whether it cost a fortune or a few coins, and neither on the whole did the people admiring it across a crowded room. What mattered was the shine, the effort, the small bright flourish of a woman who had taken the trouble to adorn herself for the occasion. There was such wonderful variety in that little dish. Brooches shaped like flowers and stars and little sprays of leaves, some dusted all over with rhinestones, some worked in bright, cheerful enamel colours, strands of glass pearls, warm and lustrous and smooth against the fingers, that lay soft against a sweater or the neckline of a cocktail dress. Clip-on earrings, since most ears in those days went unpierced, that gripped the lobe and caught the light with every turn of the head, and pinched, yes, a little more with every passing hour of a long evening out. Bangles and bracelets and cocktail rings set with glass stones in ruby red and sapphire blue and emerald green. A whole small treasury, gathered for very little money over the years. You cared for them, humble as they were, with a real and surprising tenderness. The brooch handed down from a mother or a favourite aunt carried far more than its little sparkle. It carried a memory, a face, a whole evening long past, and you kept it safe in its dish or its little velvet box for that reason above any other. You would pin it on for the important nights and feel, for a moment, connected across the years to the women who had worn it before you, as though a bit of them were pinned there over your heart. That thread of sparkle running back through a family from hand to hand was worth more than any true stone ever could be, and there was, in truth, a real freedom in the very fact that it was not precious. A woman could wear her costume jewellery boldly, layer it, mix it, pin it wherever she pleased, without the anxious carefulness that a fortune around the neck would have demanded. She could lend a piece to a daughter for a first dance, or set a brooch on a child's coat, or simply enjoy it without ever once fearing its loss. The joy came unburdened by worry, which is perhaps the purest kind of joy there is, and the little dish on the dresser held a great deal of it. There is something genuinely admirable too in the sheer spirit of it, the open willingness to delight in a thing for the plain joy it gave rather than the fortune it cost. That age understood something we sometimes let ourselves forget, that a little sparkle lifts the heart, that dressing up is a real pleasure worth having whether you're rich or poor, that the whole point of the brooch on the plain wool coat was never to fool anyone at all, but simply, honestly, to shine. There was no shame in the paste stone, only pleasure, and that is a healthy and generous way to feel about a small, bright thing. So picture that little dish on the dresser now, catching the warm lamplight, brimming with humble treasures. A few dollars worth of glass and rhinestone, and yet it held so very much inside it. The pleasure of a special evening, the memory of a mother's hand, the simple bright gladness of a bit of shine against a plain dress. There is a warmth in remembering an age that took such honest, open joy in it, that let every woman feel a little glamorous no matter what her means. Affordable joy, we might fairly call it, and joy is joy, however little it happened to cost, and there is nothing false or lesser about that at all. Let us cross the hall now to where the man of the house is dressing for work. The grey flannel suit hangs ready, pressed and sober, the quiet uniform of the office and the commuter train. It was so much the look of the age that a whole novel and film took its name from that very cloth. You knotted the tie in the mirror, slid on the jacket, checked the shine on your shoes, and stepped out into a world where nearly every man on the platform looked something like you. There was comfort in that sameness, and a little sadness in it too, but the suit meant seriousness, meant provision, meant a man ready to meet his day. It was first of all a kind of armour, and a man came to rely on it as such. He put it on and became, for the length of the working day, something a little more than himself, a representative of his office and his family both, a figure of steadiness and reliability striding out into the busy world of commerce. The grey was sober and serious on purpose, chosen to reassure rather than to dazzle. The flannel was warm and forgiving, comfortable through a long day at a desk. The cut was clean and modest and unshowy. It said in its quiet and understated way that here was a man who could be trusted, a man who took his responsibilities seriously, a man doing exactly what a man of that age was expected to do. The sameness was very much the point, and it cut in two directions at once. To stand on the station platform in the grey light of morning among 100 other men in nearly the identical suit was to belong, to be part of something larger, to know your settled place in a well-ordered and dependable world. There was real comfort in that, a sense of security and shared purpose that steadied a man as he went. And yet there was a faint shadow in it too, a flattening, and some men felt it keenly, the quiet worry that the suit could swallow the person whole, that a whole life might slip past in the same grey uniform on the same grey train, one interchangeable figure lost among the crowd of hats and briefcases. The daily ritual of dressing in it had its own steady, grounding dignity. The white shirt pressed crisp and fresh, buttoned up in the morning quiet. The tie, knotted just so before the mirror with a few practised motions of the hands, tightened and straightened at the collar. The jacket lifted and settled onto the shoulders. The shoes, shined the night before, checked one final time for their gleam. The hat taken down from the shelf and set in place at the door. It was a sequence a man could very nearly do in his sleep, and often half did, but it prepared him all the same, layer by careful layer, to step out of the private warmth of home and into the public world of work. There was pride woven into the cloth of it, real and honest pride, though a man of that era would rarely have spoken of it aloud. To wear the suit well, to keep it pressed and clean, to knot the tie neatly and shine the shoes, was to show respect for the work, and for the family the work supported. A man did not dress carelessly for the office, any more than his wife dressed carelessly to receive company. The care was a kind of language, a way of saying without words that he took it all seriously, that he meant to do right by the people who depended on him. It stood for something far larger than a length of grey cloth. That suit, something near the very centre of how the age understood what it was to be a man. To wear it was to provide, to be the one who rose in the dark and caught the early train, and did the long day's work that kept a whole household running and fed and safe. There was deep pride in that role, and a heavy weight in it too, and the suit was the visible daily sign of both. Worn faithfully year upon year in service of a family that mostly saw him only in the evenings. Tie loosened at last, the day's armour set aside on a chair. So picture him there in the grey morning light, standing before the mirror, knotting his tie with steady hands, sober and ready, and every inch a man of his time. The suit asked him to be dependable, and he was, striding out to the platform among all the others who looked so very much like him. There was a complicated tenderness in remembering it, that plain uniform of duty and provision, comfort and constraint bound up together in the same soft grey flannel. It carried a man out to meet his obligations, day upon day upon day, and that faithful going out into the dark and coming home again in the evening light was, in its own quiet and unspoken way, a whole and steady kind of love. And no man left the house without his hat. The felt fedora sat on the closet shelf beside the door, and you settled it on your head with a practised hand before stepping out into the morning. You tipped it to the ladies, lifted it in elevators, hung it on the office rack, and set it back on just so when the day was done. It was the finishing touch on every respectable man, as automatic as reaching for your keys. Within a few short years it would nearly vanish, and we still are not entirely sure why. But for a while there, the sight of a man in his hat was simply the sight of a man dressed for the world. The hat came with a whole quiet code of manners attached to it, and a man learned that code young and carried it with him all his life without ever needing to think. You lifted or tipped it to a lady you passed on the street, a small, courteous gesture as natural and unconscious as breathing. You removed it indoors, in an elevator, in a church, at the dinner table, and hung it carefully on the rack or held it at your side by the brim. You touched its brim in greeting to another man you knew. These were not rules that anyone thought much about or ever wrote down. They were simply how a gentleman carried himself through his day, a whole unspoken grammar of respect and courtesy, written entirely in the handling of a single piece of felt. There was real care lavished on the object itself, too. A good felt fedora was a thing a man chose with genuine attention, tried on before the shop mirror, considered from every angle, and then kept and tended for years. He brushed the felt to keep the dust from it, shaped the crown and the brim just so, and stored it carefully upside down or on its own block so it would hold its proper form. The band, the exact pinch of the crown, the snap of the brim turned up at the back or down at the front, all of it could be adjusted to a man's own particular taste, so that within all that broad sameness there was still a little room for a personal style. A man's hat, worn and shaped and softened over the years, came to feel almost like a part of him, as familiar as his own hands, and it finished him, in exactly the way the woman's hat finished her. A man in his grey suit was not yet fully dressed until the hat had gone on his head, and to step out the door bareheaded felt as strangely incomplete to him as it would have felt to her. It sat on the shelf by the door, the very last thing he reached for on his way out into the morning, and the very first he set aside on his way back in at night, bracketing the whole working day neatly at both its ends. The small gesture of settling it on with a practised hand was the final punctuation of getting dressed, the quiet sign that a man was ready now to go out and meet the world on its own terms. You saw them everywhere in those years, and the sight was so ordinary that no one thought to remark on it. A crowded train platform was a field of hats. A busy city sidewalk at the noon hour was a moving river of felt crowns, grey and brown and black, bobbing along in the sun, A ballpark, a church, a downtown street on a Saturday, all of it topped with the same near-universal hat, so that a photograph of any crowd from that time can be dated almost at a glance by the sea of brims alone. Then it vanished, and it vanished with remarkable speed, and the reasons for it remain a gentle and much-argued puzzle to this day. Some point to the lower, sleeker cars that a man could no longer comfortably wear a tall hat inside. Some point to the changing styles, the taller and more elaborate hair, the looser and easier manners of the years that came after. Some point to a single bare-headed young leader who made going without a hat seem modern and youthful and vigorous. Whatever the true cause, within only a handful of years the hat that no respectable man would once have gone without became a thing that hardly any man wore at all, and a whole daily ritual, along with all its small courtesies, simply evaporated from the streets. So picture it there on the shelf by the door, brushed and shaped and patiently waiting for the practised hand that would settle it on come morning. Such a small and ordinary thing, and yet it carried a whole world of courtesy folded up inside it. The tipping and the lifting and the touching of the brim, all those quiet gestures of respect that went out the door along with it, and never quite came back. There is a real wistfulness in remembering a time when a man finished himself with his hat and greeted his fellows with a small courteous lift of the brim, and was, in that simple and graceful gesture, a gentleman on an ordinary street. Back in the kitchen now, and here is the apron waiting on its hook. You tie it on first thing, over the house dress, before the eggs go in the pan. Some were plain and practical, made to take the mess of a whole day of cooking. Others were fussy little half-aprons trimmed in rick-rack and ruffles, saved for when company came, more decoration than protection. Your mother had a drawer full of them, and so did every woman you knew. It was the garment of a home in motion, of hands always busy, of meals appearing 3 times a day like clockwork. To see one now is to be pulled straight back into a warm kitchen and the smell of something good on the stove. There were, in truth, 2 quite different aprons living side by side in that drawer, and a woman knew without a moment's thought exactly when each of them was called for. There was the workaday apron, the full one that covered the whole front of the dress from the shoulders down, sturdy and endlessly washable, ready to take the flour and the grease and the splatter of a long and busy day's cooking. And there was the pretty apron, the little half-apron in a bright, cheerful print, trimmed with ruffles and rick-rack and sometimes a delicate bit of lace at the hem, that a woman tied on when guests were expected, more a piece of hostess finery than any real defence against the mess of the stove. It was a garment in near constant motion, because the woman who wore it hardly ever paused for long. The apron went on first thing in the morning and stayed on through the making of breakfast and the washing up after, through the baking and the marketing and the midday meal, through the long, slow afternoon of supper's careful preparation. It caught the flour when she rolled out the pie crust on the floured board. It dried her hands 100 times a day at the sink, and folded up quickly at the corner, it even pulled a hot pan from the oven in a pinch when the potholder had wandered off somewhere. It was the working skin of the whole kitchen, worn all day by the busy hands that kept the household fed. The pretty ones deserve their own fond and separate word, because they were small works of real care in themselves. Many a woman sewed her own of an evening, choosing a cheerful printed cotton, adding a gathered ruffle at the hem, edging it neatly with a length of bright rick-rack, embroidering one corner with little flowers or a cheerful stitched motto. They were given as gifts between friends, tucked into Christmas parcels, handed down from mother to daughter and treasured. To tie on a fresh, pretty apron when the doorbell rang of an afternoon was to greet your guests as a proper hostess, a woman whose home and whose table were ready and warm and glad to receive them. It marked the rhythm of a whole day, that garment, in a way we might not notice at first. Tied on in the morning, it stayed until the last dish was dried and put away at night, and the taking off of it was a small quiet signal that the day's work in the kitchen was finally blessedly done. A woman untied it, hung it back on its hook, and became for a few evening hours something other than the tireless engine of the family's meals. The apron came off, and she could sit at last. It carries so much within it now, that simple tied garment, more perhaps than the women who wore it every day ever meant it to hold. It stands for the whole endless, largely unthanked labour of feeding a family, the 3 full meals a day appearing like clockwork on the table, the flour and the heat and the ceaseless motion of a woman's hands from dawn to dark. And it stands too for the deep warmth at the very heart of all that labour, the care poured into every dish, the pride taken in a well-kept kitchen, the love that a woman gave out, meal after meal after meal, in the only steady language her long days ever gave her for it. So picture it there on its hook by the stove, tied fresh each morning over the house dress, ready for another day of ceaseless useful work. Such a plain and unremarkable thing, a length of cloth and a pair of strings, and yet the whole warm beating heart of the home seems somehow folded up inside it. To catch its remembered scent now, flour and coffee and something good simmering on the back burner, is to be carried all at once straight back into a mother's kitchen. And there, in that warm, bright room, to feel again the steady, tireless, unspoken love that a simple, tied apron quietly stood for all day long in every home on every street. It is very early still, and before the day fully begins there is the housecoat. Soft and quilted, buttoned or zipped up the front, it was the thing you slipped into to make the coffee and see the family off before you dressed properly for the day. The nicer ones, sometimes called dusters, were pretty enough to answer the door in cheerful prints and soft pastels. It was not quite pyjamas and not quite an outfit, a gentle in-between garment for the quietest hours of the morning. There is a coziness to remembering it, that soft private time before the world came calling, wrapped in something warm and easy. It lived in that tender in-between space between sleep and the day, and there was truly nothing else quite like it anywhere in the closet. You would slip it on over your nightgown in the grey half-light of early morning, before the house had properly woken, and pad down the hall in your slippers to put the coffee on to percolate. It was warm and soft and forgiving, quilted through for the chill of the early hour, easy to fasten up the front with sleep still heavy in your eyes, and your hair not yet done. In it, for a little while longer, you were not yet the fully dressed and carefully presented woman of the day. You were simply and gently yourself, warm and unhurried, easing by slow degrees into the hours that lay ahead. There was a real range to them, from the plainly practical to the genuinely and deliberately pretty. The simplest were just cosy quilted wrappers, meant only for keeping warm in a chilly house on a cold morning, no thought given to how they looked. But the nicer ones, the dusters, were made to be seen and to flatter, cut with a bit of shape through the waist and printed in cheerful florals or soft dreaming pastels, decent and pretty enough that a woman could answer the door to the milkman or take in the morning paper from the porch without a single moment's embarrassment. A woman might well keep both, the plain warm one for the coldest and most private mornings, and the pretty one for the days she wished to feel a little more put together even before she'd properly dressed. It framed a quiet and precious stretch of the day that belonged, however briefly, to the woman herself alone. In that early hour, wrapped soft in her housecoat with the first cup of coffee, warm between her hands, she had a small pocket of genuine peace before the real work of the day began in earnest, before the children woke and clamoured, before the husband needed his breakfast on the table, before the long and unforgiving list of the day's demands all came due at once. It was a gentle threshold, that garment, a way of being awake and about in the house without yet being fully on duty, and there was a comfort in it that a woman came, over the years, to quietly cherish and depend on. You can picture the scene so easily, and it is a warm one. The kitchen dim and still, the coffee beginning to bubble and fill the room with its good smell, a woman standing at the window in her soft quilted housecoat, watching the light come up grey over the yard. No one asking anything of her yet. No performance required, no company to greet, no appearance to maintain. Just the quiet and the warmth of the coat and the coffee and a few minutes that were hers before the day laid its hands on her. That coziness is exactly what makes it so warm and so gentle a thing to remember, because it stands for a kind of ease that we do not always allow ourselves anymore. The housecoat was, in its soft quilted way, a small daily permission to be slow and unpolished for a little while, to move through the early house not yet dressed and not yet performing for anyone, wrapped in something that asked absolutely nothing of you in return. There is a real tenderness in that picture. The woman in her housecoat in the pale early kitchen light, unhurried and at peace, entirely at home in herself, before the wider day arrived to claim her for its own. So picture it there now, laid over the back of a chair or hung softly behind the bedroom door, quilted and warm and waiting for the earliest and quietest hour of the morning. Such a humble, homely thing, neither quite one thing nor quite the other, and yet it held one of the very gentlest moments of a woman's whole long day. To remember it is to remember the smell of that first pot of coffee, and the deep hush of a house not yet awake, and the simple, uncomplicated comfort of being warm and easy and at peace for a little while, wrapped in something soft before the world came knocking at the door and the day in earnest at last began. Something was beginning to loosen now, and here is the proof of it. Pedal pushers cut off neatly below the knee, and capri pants slim and cropped just above the ankle. Women wore them for gardening and picnics and bicycle rides, for all those easy afternoons when a dress felt like too much. A film star or two made them fashionable, and suddenly it was perfectly fine for a woman to be seen out in trousers, at least the casual kind, at least on a Saturday. It was a small loosening of the old rules, a first gentle step toward the comfort we take for granted now. And you can feel the future arriving quietly in the crop of those pale summer pants. The names alone tell you a little about where they came from and how they meant to be worn. Pedal pushers earned their name honestly, cut off below the knee so the fabric would not catch and tangle in a bicycle chain as a young woman rode down the summer street, hair loose, the afternoon wide open. Capri, slimmer and cropped a little higher near the ankle, took their name from a sunny island abroad, and carried a whiff of the seaside and the holiday about them, of warm stone and blue water and an easier way of living. Both said the same new thing, in slightly different accents, that a woman, on the right sort of afternoon, might dress simply for her own comfort and her own pleasure. And that was, quietly, something close to new under the sun. For a very long time, trousers on a woman had been a thing of the factory floor or the working farm, practical necessities pulled on for hard and dirty labour, never a matter of style or of choice for an ordinary afternoon. To step out in front of the neighbours in a pair of cropped pants, for no better reason than that they were comfortable and the day was fine, would have raised eyebrows in an earlier decade. But the rules were softening now, gently and unevenly, and what had been faintly scandalous was becoming, season by season, simply the ordinary thing a woman wore to garden or to picnic on a Saturday. The film stars helped it along, as they so often did in those years, when a beloved and graceful actress was seen, on the screen or in the pages of a magazine, looking slim and elegant and entirely at ease in a pair of well-cut capris, the whole idea gained a shine of glamour it might otherwise have lacked. Suddenly the cropped trouser was not merely practical but chic, not a lowering of standards but a lovely new way to be casual, and women who had never dreamed of wearing pants for pleasure looked again and thought, well, perhaps. That is so often how these changes come, not by decree but by permission, one admired figure at a time. You wore them for the easy hours, the ones that a dress and its whole apparatus of care did not quite suit. For kneeling in the garden among the tomato plants, hands in the warm dirt. For a picnic on a blanket in the park, where a full skirt and its crinoline would only have been a nuisance. For riding a bicycle down a shaded street, for hanging the wash, for a lazy Saturday, with no company expected and nothing formal on the calendar. In them a woman could move freely, bend and stretch, and sit however she pleased, and there was a real and simple joy in that freedom, small as it might sound to us now who take it so wholly for granted. You can feel the future arriving in them, and that is what makes them worth pausing over. They were a first gentle step, a small crack in the old wall of rules that had governed so strictly what a woman might wear and when and where. They did not overturn anything all at once. A woman still would not have worn them to church or downtown or to receive important company. But on a Saturday afternoon, in her own yard, on her own bicycle, she wore trousers and thought little of it, and in that small ordinary freedom you can see, if you look, the whole comfortable future beginning quietly to take shape. So picture her there in the warm light of a summer afternoon, in her pale cropped capris and a simple blouse, kneeling in the garden or wheeling her bicycle out from the garage, easy and comfortable and unbothered by anyone's opinion of it. Such a small change. A hem cut off below the knee, and yet it carried so much forward with it. A whole loosening of the world. A whole new ease just beginning to arrive. There is a lightness in remembering it, in that image of a woman dressed for nothing but her own comfort on a fine afternoon, taking a small freedom that her mother might never have known, and taking it so naturally that she hardly noticed she was stepping gently into a whole new way of being, now to the bedrooms down the hall where the young people were beginning to dress for themselves, dungarees, what we would call blue jeans, rolled up into thick cuffs at the ankle, worn with a plain white t-shirt and an easy slouch. It was not what mother would have chosen, and that was rather the point. Denim was moving off the farm and the factory floor, and onto the backs of teenagers who wanted something that felt like their own. It worried a few parents and a few principals, but it was here to stay. And there is something almost sweet in it now, that first quiet rebellion, stitched in sturdy blue cotton and worn with such careful cool. For as long as anyone could remember, denim had meant work and only work, the honest hard cloth of the farmer and the miner and the man on the assembly line, chosen for its toughness and nothing more. It was what you wore to sweat in, to crawl under a tractor in, to wear out slowly at the knees, that a young person would choose it for pleasure, would put it on not to labour but simply to be seen, was a genuinely new idea, and to the older generation a slightly baffling one. Why, they wondered, would a child dress down when he could dress up? But the young understood something their parents did not quite grasp yet. What they understood was that the very plainness of it was the appeal. Denim was democratic and unfussy, the same on a rich boy as a poor one, and it carried a whiff of the rugged and the free, of the cowboy and the drifter and the working man. To wear it was to shrug off just a little the whole careful apparatus of respectability their parents lived inside, the suits and the hats and the pressed shirts and the endless rules about what was proper. In a pair of dungarees and a white t-shirt a young person could feel, for a while, like someone who made his own way and answered to no one, even if he was only walking down to the corner drugstore. The cuff was the mark of a certain care, and it is a lovely detail to sit with. The jeans came long, made for men taller and broader, and so the young rolled the excess up into thick even cuffs at the ankle, and in doing so turned a practical necessity into a small point of style. There was a right way to do it, neat and even and just so, and the young got it exactly right, the way the young always do with the things that matter to them. It looked careless, that cuff, but it was not careless at all. It was studied, deliberate, worn with all the attention that youth pours into looking as though it has not tried. The pictures helped it along, as the pictures helped so much along in those years. When a young actor appeared on the great screen in his jeans and his white t-shirt and his air of wounded, restless cool, leaning against something with his collar up and his eyes half closed, a whole generation saw itself reflected and magnified and made glamorous. Here was their plain blue cloth lifted up into something powerful and romantic, the uniform of the beautiful and the misunderstood. Boys studied that slouch in the mirror. They practiced that easy lean. And the dungarees, once the cloth of the field, became overnight the cloth of a certain dangerous and enviable youth. It worried the grown-ups, of course, and that worry was itself part of the appeal. A few schools tried to ban the things outright, sending children home to change, insisting on proper trousers and tucked shirts. A few parents fretted over what it meant, this deliberate dressing down, this refusal of the standards they had worked so hard to meet. They saw in it a whiff of disorder, of rebellion, of a younger generation slipping the traces, and they were not entirely wrong, though the rebellion was gentler than they feared. It was mostly just the young wanting, as the young always want, something that was theirs and not their parents', a way of looking that said, quietly but clearly, I am not you. And it was here to stay, though few could have guessed then just how permanently. The plain blue cloth that scandalized a principal or two would go on to dress the whole world, would outlast the suits and the hats and the gloves and nearly everything else in the closets of that careful decade. What began as the small rebellion of a few teenagers in rolled cuffs became, in time, simply what everyone wore, everywhere, at every age. The rebels won so completely that their rebellion stopped looking like one at all. So picture him there in the bedroom mirror, a young person turning this way and that, checking the roll of the cuff, tugging the white tee straight, practicing the slouch that would say all the things he did not yet have the words for. Such a plain and humble outfit, sturdy blue cotton and a bit of cotton jersey, and yet it carried a whole quiet declaration of independence stitched right into its seams. There is something almost tender in it now, that first careful reach for a self of one's own, worn so cool and so deliberate, in cloth so honest and so plain, at the very beginning of a whole new world. It is evening now, and you can picture him leaning against the car at the edge of the lot. The black leather jacket, collar up, zippers gleaming under the streetlight, the very picture of the young rebel that the pictures had made famous. It smelled of leather and rain, and a little of engine oil, and it carried a whole attitude in its cut. Not every boy who wore one was any trouble at all, of course. Most just liked the way it felt, the way it made them stand a little taller against the neon. It was the costume of a certain kind of freedom, and half a lifetime later, the sight of one still carries that same faint electric charge. It had begun, like the dungarees, as a purely practical thing, born on the backs of men who truly needed it. The pilot high in his open cockpit, the soldier, and above all the motorcycle rider, who wanted good thick hide between his skin and the hard road, should the worst ever happen. The jacket was armour, plain and simple, cut close and zipped tight to keep out the wind and the weather, and to hold together in a spill. There was nothing of fashion in it at first, only function, only the sensible protection a hard and fast life required, and then the young got hold of it, and everything changed. For the young saw in that jacket not just protection, but a whole way of being, and they wanted it badly. It looked dangerous. It looked free. It looked like the open road and the roar of an engine and a life lived fast and unafraid, and never mind that the boy wearing it might have nothing more dangerous than a bicycle and a paper route. The jacket said something the boy wanted said about himself, and so he saved for it, and wore it, and stood a little differently once it was on his shoulders. That was its true power, that transformation, the way a length of black hide could make an ordinary boy feel like someone out of a picture. And the pictures were where it truly caught fire, when a brooding young star appeared on the screen in his black leather and his blue jeans, sullen and beautiful and misunderstood, astride a motorcycle or slouched against a wall. The jacket became overnight the very emblem of youthful rebellion. Every restless boy in every quiet town wanted one, wanted to feel that same charge, that same sense of standing just outside the tidy rules of the grown-up world. The jacket became a costume you could buy, a bit of that dangerous glamour a young person could zip up and wear down to the drive-in on a Friday night. It worried people, that jacket, more than the dungarees ever had. There was something in it that spoke of trouble, of the wrong crowd, of boys who raced their cars too fast and stayed out too late, and did not answer as they should to their elders. A mother might frown to see her son come home in one. A father might wonder aloud where the money had come from, and where the boy meant to go dressed like that. But most of the boys in the jackets were no trouble at all, not really. They were just young, and wanting to feel a little wild and free before the grey flannel suit came for them, as they knew somehow it eventually would. You can smell it still if you close your eyes, that particular scent of a well-worn leather jacket. The rich smell of the hide itself, deepening as it aged and softened to the shape of the boy who wore it. A little rain soaked into it from a walk home under the streetlights. A faint trace of engine oil, of cigarette smoke, of the cool night air of the parking lot. It was a smell of the evening and the outdoors and a certain kind of freedom, and it clung to the jacket for years, so that pulling on an old one could carry a man straight back to the boy he had been. The picture of it endures because the feeling it carried endures, that faint electric charge of youthful freedom and rebellion. Collar turned up against the night, zippers catching the neon glow, a boy leaning easy against a car at the edge of the lot with his whole unwritten life stretched out before him. He was not going anywhere in particular most nights. He was just there, being young, wearing his freedom on his shoulders where the world could see it. So picture him there still, in the warm evening dark, the streetlight catching the black leather, the collar up, the slouch practiced and easy. Such a simple thing, a jacket of black hide, and yet it held a whole dream of freedom in it, a whole restless longing to be wild and unbound for a little while before life settled in. Half a lifetime later, the sight of one still stirs something, some memory of what it felt like to be young and full of feeling on a Friday night, wrapped in leather, leaning against a car, believing the whole world was yours for the taking. Now for the special evenings, the ones that came only a few times a year. The fur stole draped soft across the shoulders, or the mink saved for the most important nights of all, pulled from its scented storage and worn out to the theatre or the anniversary dinner. It was warmth and luxury and a lifetime of saving, sometimes handed down from a mother or an aunt like a piece of the family history. You felt different wearing it, taller somehow, wrapped in something rare. Not everyone had one, and those who didn't wear it lightly. It marked an occasion as something to remember, and remember it you did, long after the evening was over. It was, above almost anything else a woman might own, the mark of having arrived, of having climbed a little way up in the world. In a decade that prized abundance and reward after so many lean and careful years, the fur was the great visible sign that a family had made it, that the hard work had paid off, that there was money enough now not just for the necessities, but for something rare and beautiful and wholly unnecessary. A woman in her fur, stepping out on a winter evening, wore her family's success across her shoulders for all the world to admire, and there was a real and honest pride in that. But it was far more than a display of money, and the women who wore it knew that better than anyone. For most, a good fur was the saving of years, set aside dollar by careful dollar, or else the treasured gift of a husband on a landmark anniversary, or a precious thing handed down from a mother or a favourite aunt, along with all the memories it carried. To wear such a piece was to feel connected to the woman who had worn it before, to slip your arms into the warmth she had known, and that made it something close to an heirloom, a bit of the family's own history worn soft against the skin. There was a whole ritual around its keeping, fitting for something so treasured. The good fur did not hang carelessly in the ordinary closet among the everyday coats. It was stored with real care, wrapped against the moths, sometimes sent away for the summer to a cold vault at the furrier's, where it could rest safe through the warm months. And when the special evening came at last, the bringing out of it was itself a small ceremony. The unwrapping, the shaking out, the faint scent of the storage and the cedar rising from the fur as a woman drew it at last around her shoulders. That scent alone could mark an evening as one of the important ones. It changed how a woman carried herself. The moment it settled onto her shoulders, there is no other way to say it. Wrapped in something so soft and so rare, a woman stood a little taller, moved a little more grandly, felt herself transformed into a more glamorous version of who she was. The fur asked for a certain bearing, and gave that bearing back in return. A woman did not slouch or hurry in her mink. She glided. She was aware of herself, of the softness at her neck and the eyes that followed her, and she rose to meet the occasion the fur had declared this evening to be. For that was the true work of it, more than warmth, more even than display. The fur marked an evening as something set apart from all the ordinary evenings, something to be remembered. You did not wear it to the market or the ordinary supper. You wore it to the theatre, to the fine restaurant, to the anniversary dinner, to the once-a-year occasions that a life is measured out in. And its presence transformed those nights, lifted them, told everyone, including the woman herself, that this, tonight, was an evening that mattered, one that would be talked of and remembered long after. And remember it you did, exactly as promised. Years later, an old woman might take the fur down from wherever it had come to rest, and the touch of it, and the scent of it, would bring a whole evening flooding back. The theatre lights, the good dinner, the man on her arm, the particular joy of a night when everything had felt rare and beautiful and complete. The fur held those evenings inside it, the way certain objects come to hold whole pieces of a life, and to touch it again was to touch the past itself. So picture it there in its careful wrapping, waiting for the few grand evenings of the year, holding the scent of cedar and of every occasion it had graced. Such a rare and treasured thing, the saving of years or the gift of a lifetime, and it carried so much within its softness, pride and memory, and the marking out of a life's great nights. There is a warmth in remembering it, in the image of a woman drawing it around her shoulders and standing suddenly taller, wrapped in something precious, stepping out into an evening she would carry with her, soft and glowing for all the rest of her days. And so we come to the quiet end of it, the last soft hour of our wandering through those forgotten closets. We have felt the rustle of a crinoline across a kitchen floor, and pulled on white gloves finger by finger before stepping out the door. We have set a hat before the mirror with a careful hand, folded a bobby sock just so, tied an apron fresh over a house dress, and drawn a fur soft around the shoulders for the one grand evening of the year. All of it small, all of it careful, all of it done with a kind of quiet attention we do not always give ourselves the time for now. Take a moment before you drift off to think about the people who lived inside those clothes. The woman at the vanity checking the seam of her stocking, the man knotting his tie in the grey morning light, going out to hold a life together, the young person turning before the mirror, rolling a cuff, reaching gently toward a self of their own. They did not think of themselves as living in a golden age. They were just living, dressing for the day, caring for small things, going quietly about the ordinary work of a life. And maybe that is the thing worth carrying forward, tucked into your own hurried days. Not the gloves or the hats, not the crinolines gone to the attic, but the care itself, the willingness to slow down, to notice a small thing and tend it well, to dress a plain moment with a little grace. So pull the blanket up now and let the day fall away. Let those quiet, careful people keep you company as you go. They tended their small things gently and were glad, and so, tonight, may you be too. Sleep well, and thank you for spending this evening here.